The machines that carried the Apollo rockets, 6 million pounds of steel crawling towards the launch pad. They were built here, not in Houston, not in Cape Canaveral, here in a small Midwestern city most people have never heard of. A city that carved highways, dug mines, moved mountains, and helped launch humanity into space. I'm Alan, and today we're going there and doing that in Marion, Ohio. If you want to understand Marion, you have to understand the giants that were born here. For more than a century, this town didn't just build machines, it built a muscle that reshaped the modern world. Long before Marion helped launch rockets toward the moon, it carved the earth beneath her feet. The Marion Steam Shovel Company began in 1884 with simple steam-powered diggers, but ambition grows fast in places like this. By the mid-20th century, Marion wasn't just another factory town, it was the beating heart of American earth-moving. At its peak in the 1970s, more than 2,500 workers filled this 70-acre complex, an army of welders, machinists, draftsmen, and engineers who kept the world moving. When the world needed a mountain moved, a canal carved, or a mine opened, they turned to Marion. The Panama Canal, one of the greatest engineering feats in human history, was dug with Marion shovels. The Chicago Drainage Canal, the Iron Ranges of Minnesota, coal fields in Australia and South Africa, highways, railroads, dams, the fingerprints of this company stretch across the globe. And these weren't ordinary machines, they were titans, drag lines and stripping shovels so massive they had to be assembled on site, piece by piece, like steel cathedrals rising from the ground. The Marion 6360, known as the Captain, weighed 28 million pounds, the largest shovel ever built. Others stood taller than 15-story buildings, with buckets big enough to swallow a two-car garage. But the greatest chapter in Marion's story came in the 1960s. NASA needed a way to move the Saturn V, the largest rocket ever built. Designed in 1963 and delivered in 1965, the crawler transporters remain the largest self-propelled land vehicles ever constructed, each one the size of a baseball infield, each one powered by locomotive engines, each one capable of carrying 6 million pounds of steel at a steady, unstoppable 1 mile per hour. Every Apollo mission, every shuttle launch, every step toward the moon began with a machine built in Marion, Ohio. But even titans are subject to the tide of history. As the world changed, mining slowed and contracts faded. In 1997, after more than a century of shaping the planet, Marion merged into Bucyrus Erie, and the gates that once exhaled the largest machines on Earth were locked for the final time. Today, the factory stands as a monument to an era when American industry spoke in the language of steel and ambition. But walking these grounds isn't just an act of exploration. It's an act of remembrance. Marion didn't just build machines, it built the foundations of the modern world. You can still see the legacy of the interstate highways, the raw materials that powered the American century, and the footprints pressed into the lunar dust. The Titan has fallen, but the world it helped build still stands, and that legacy echoes through this city. Before Marion built the machines that move the earth, it built the rails that move the world. In 1902, local leaders, including a young newspaper editor named Warren G. Harding, were so embarrassed by Marion's ramshackle depots that they demanded a station worthy of a rising industrial powerhouse. They didn't just want a building, they wanted a monument, and they got one. The Marion power shovel was the muscle, the rails were the veins, carrying the lifeblood of industry through the heart of Ohio. Marion Union Station opened in 1902, built by the Erie Railroad, to serve as a city already pulsing with freight. Within a decade, it became one of the busiest rail junctions in the Midwest, where the Erie, the Pennsylvania, the Hocking Valley, later C&O, and the New York Central all crossed paths in a perfect steel X, known simply as the Diamond. At its peak, more than 120 trains passed through here every day. Passenger cars bound for Chicago, Cleveland, and New York shared this rail with coal drags, iron freights, and steel shipments feeding the factories that defined the American century. But the rails did more than move people, they powered industry. Coal from southern Ohio arrived here before fueling the furnaces at Marion Power Shovel. Iron from the Great Lakes rolled in to be forged into machines that carved the Panama Canal, and later carried the Saturn V towards the moon. Every shipment, every whistle, every spark of motion tied Marion's factories to the nation's destiny. Inside the station, the railway post office sorted mail at all hours, turning Marion into a regional communication hub long before the digital age. And towering above the crossings, the AC interlocking tower controlled the diamond, a nerve center where operators managed hundreds of daily train movements with absolute precision. And during both World Wars, these platforms became a stage of emotion. Soldiers departing for Europe, families waving goodbye, telegrams arriving around the clock. And in 1923, the station witnessed the final stop of President Harding's funeral train, greeted by thousands of mourners. By the 1950s, diesel replaced steam and highways began to steal the rhythm of the rails. Passenger service dwindled, and in 1976, the last passenger train departed, leaving the station silent for the first time in generations. But the history didn't vanish. It just traded its passenger suits for heavy-duty industrial work uniforms. Today, nearly 60 freight trains still thunder past this depot every day. The Diamond remains one of the most active rail crossings in Ohio, a living echo of the city's industrial heartbeat. These rails still connect Marion to Whirlpool, to New Car, to the global market beyond. Marion's rails didn't just move trains, they move history. And that history still runs beneath the iron. Marion's industrial story wasn't built by one giant alone. It was shaped by dozens of factories, each adding its own thread to the city's legacy. Take the old Allied Casting Company on Rose Avenue. This wasn't just a foundry. It was the backbone of Marion's casting industry. For decades, its furnaces burned day and night, pouring molten metal into gears, housings, and cast iron parts that kept America's machines moving. Today, the complex stands like a steel skeleton, a reminder of how much metal it took to build the American dream. Across town, the Susquehanna Silk Mill added a different texture to the city's economy. Long before Marion was defined by iron, it was defined by thread. Hundreds of workers, many of them women, operated rows of looms that produced ribbons, garnet linings, and fine silk shipped nationwide. It's a glimpse into an earlier, more delicate layer of Marion's manufacturing DNA. And then there's Nucor Steel Marion, the evolution of that legacy. What began as Armco Steel in 1919 has transformed into a modern mini-mill, melting scrap metal into new steel using electric arc furnaces. Today, Nucor produces hundreds of thousands of tons of rebar and structural steel each year, keeping Marion connected to the construction projects across the Midwest. From molten metal to woven silk to recycled steel reborn, these industries remind us that Marion's story isn't just about giants. It's about countless hands, shops, and factories that kept the city working decade after decade. When World War II erupted, America didn't just need soldiers, it needed an industrial miracle. And in Marion, Ohio, that miracle arrived in the form of warehouses so vast, so efficient, and so relentless that they became the quiet engines of victory. This wasn't just storage, this was strategy, this was scale, and this was the moment when Marion became a logistics machine. The silent arsenal built on open fields and rail lines. By the early 1940s, Marion was already a manufacturing powerhouse, but when the United States entered World War II, the city transformed into something far larger, a logistics hub that fed the war effort with the precision of a beating industrial heart. The United States Army Corps of Engineers selected Marion as the site of one of the nation's premier Class 4 supply depots, officially known as the Marion Engineer Depot, MED. Class 4 meant construction and fortification materials, the heavy stuff, bridging, lumber, steel, machinery, and the equipment that built the war. Over 1,000 acres of farmland were transformed into a logistical titan. Warehouses stretched longer than city blocks, built with reinforced concrete and steel trusses, not for retail, but for mass mobilization. Inside these buildings, the Army processed everything from crane parts and pontoon bridge sections to generators, compressors, and the nuts and bolts that kept American armor rolling across Europe and the Pacific. These weren't just warehouses, these were engines. Why Marion? Because it was the perfect geometry. The diamond, the crossing of four major rail empires, became a conveyor belt for war. Freight cars rolled in, unloaded, sorted, repacked, and dispatched with military precision. The depot had miles of internal rail spurs, allowing entire trains to be broken down and rebuilt without ever leaving the property. This depot didn't just arm American soldiers, it was the primary staging ground for the Lend-Lease program, shipping vital supplies to Britain, the Soviet Union, and China months before American boots ever hit the ground in Europe. Thousands of civilian workers, many of them women stepping into industrial roles for the first time, clocked in around the clock. Forklifts buzzed between aisles, stacked to the rafters. Clerks managed inventory so massive they bordered on the incomprehensible. Every crate hitting the dock in New York or San Francisco had a paper trail that led back to these rail spurs in Marion. It was a synchronized ballet of paperwork, steam, manpower, and urgency. You aren't just looking at an empty industrial space today, you're looking at the place where the logistics of victory were invented. When the war ended, many depots across the country were bulldozed, but in Marion, the warehouses stayed. Their durability is a testament to the urgency of that era. Built fast, built strong, built to protect, and built to last. After the war, MED became a redistribution and storage site, then a disposal center, and eventually home to new manufacturing and logistics operations. Its massive footprint shaped the industrial corridor for generations. Drive down Harding Highway today, and you're not just passing an industrial park, you're passing a monument to a time when this city carried the weight of the World War on its shoulders. Some of the original structures still stand, concrete walls, steel beams, and cavernous interiors echoing with the memory of a nation mobilized. World War II demanded speed, precision, and scale, and in Marion, Ohio, the warehouses delivered. They were the silent giants of the war effort, and their legacy still stretches across the city's industrial horizon. If you've made it this far into the story, you're exactly the kind of person I make these films for. I explore towns like Marion because every place has a history worth remembering, and I want to keep uncovering them with you. So tell me in the comments what town I should dive into next. I read every single message and I respond to all of them. Your suggestions shape where I go and what stories I tell. And if you want to help this series grow, hit the like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves American history as much as you do. We're building something special here, one town at a time. In a city shaped by giants that rose and fell, one factory didn't fade into history. It adapted, evolved, and kept the lights on. While so many industrial towns watched their last smokestacks go cold, Marion held on to something rare, a plant that still builds, still hires, and still matters. When you look at the Rust Belt, you often see the ghosts of the past, but in Marion, the assembly line never stopped. This isn't a museum of what used to be, it's a global powerhouse of what is. This is Whirlpool, the factory that refused to leave. By the 1950s, Marion's industrial landscape was shifting. The steam era was ending, the war depots were winding down, and the giants of heavy machinery were beginning to consolidate in many towns. That would have been the end of the story, a one-way ticket to decline. But in 1955, everything changed. Whirlpool Corporation opened its Marion facility to build appliances for a booming post-war America. Suburban homes were rising, families were growing, appliances became the new symbol of comfort, convenience, and the American dream. Whirlpool didn't come for nostalgia. It came for logistics, scale, and a workforce with a metal-minded culture forged through decades of casting, machining, and shovel building. The plant sat on a massive footprint, today over 2 million square feet, with direct access to rail lines, highways, and a labor force that understood manufacturing at a level few cities could match. This wasn't just another factory, it was the beginning of Marion's second industrial life, an anchor for a new era. If the wartime depots were built for speed, Whirlpool was built for volume. Inside, assembly lines stretched the length of football fields. Steel coils were stamped, pressed, welded, painted, and transformed into appliances destined for homes across North America. At its peak, the Marion facility became the largest clothes dryer manufacturing plant on the planet, producing millions of units per year. Robotic welders sparked in perfect rhythm, forklifts moved in constant motion, conveyor belts carried parts through a maze of stations where human hands and high-tech automation worked side by side. This was a modern manufacturing, precise, efficient, and relentless. And while other factories across the Midwest shuttered, GM Mansfield, Ford Lorain, Tecumseh Marion, Whirlpool kept investing. New stamping lines, new paint systems, new robotics, new automation cycles. In a region defined by loss, Whirlpool became the exception, a plant that grew instead of vanished. But behind every robot is a community that depends on the rhythm of these shifts. The real story isn't the machines, it's the people. Generations of Marion families have worked here. Parents, children, siblings, sometimes 3 generations on the same line. The plant became a stabilizing force in a city that has seen too many closures. Workers built more than appliances, they built mortgages, college funds, retirements, and futures. The plant's workforce, represented by the IUE CWA Local 847, helped shape Whirlpool into one of the region's most stable employers. Whirlpool became the heartbeat of Marion's modern economy, a living reminder that American manufacturing didn't die, it evolved. Today, the plant remains one of the largest employers in north central Ohio, producing dryers and components shipped across the continent. It stands as a rare survival of the Rust Belt era, not because it avoided change, but because it embraced it. In a city shaped by giants that came and went, Whirlpool stayed, it adapted, it evolved, it kept building. And in Marion, Ohio, that matters. Because this isn't just a factory, it's proof that the industrial story is still being written. On the south side of Marion, our cellar middle brings a steel story into the modern age. This isn't a blast furnace relic, it's precision steel processing built for the automotive world. Coils arrived by rail, are slit, leveled, and transformed into high-grade material that local manufacturers depend on. In a region once defined by heavy iron, our cellar middle acts as the steel bridge between raw supply and refined product. Fast, efficient, and essential to Marion's modern industrial corridor. Then you have Piston Automotive, the modular edge of Marion's manufacturing scene. This is a 21st century production, just-in-time logistics, engineered assemblies, and automotive systems built with surgical precision. Inside, teams build wiring harnesses, battery modules, and complex components that ship directly to major automakers. It's high-speed, high-stakes work that shows how Marion's workforce has evolved from heavy labor to advanced technical skill, powering the next generation of mobility. And finally, there's Motherson, the global integration point in Marion's industrial chain. As part of one of the world's largest automotive suppliers, their plant produces molded plastic, interior systems, and precision assemblies for vehicles built across North America. This is international manufacturing rooted in local labor. Motherson brings global scale to Marion's landscape, proving the city isn't isolated. It's fully connected to the worldwide supply chain, from components to cockpits. In a city known for steel, machinery, and the giants of American industry, one factory took a different path. No iron, no engines, no smokestacks, just snacks. Millions of them. You may not know the name Wyandotte Snacks, but you've almost certainly eaten something they've made. From national brands to private label favorites, this Marion company has been fueling America's cravings for decades. And it all started with a family, a farm, and a simple idea during the Great Depression. This is Wyandotte Snacks, the quiet giant hiding in plain sight. In 1936, Hoover and Ava Brown faced a reality familiar to many Midwestern families. Farm income was drying up, and their solution was diversification. They planted 100 acres of popcorn, betting that even in hard times, Americans would still pay a few cents for a comfort treat. And they were right. Wyandotte grew from a small family operation into a regional powerhouse known as Popped Right. They partnered with local candy makers to produce some of the first commercial caramel corn sold in movie theaters across the country. This wasn't just a factory, it was a laboratory of flavor, texture, and food science. As America's snacking habits changed, Wyandotte adapted. They mastered extrusion, the process that turns grains into airy, crunchy shapes, a breakthrough that quietly put Marion on the national snack map. If you've eaten a store-brand cheese curl, a puff corn snack, or a crunchy private label favorite, there's a good chance it came from right here. Today, Wyandotte is one of the most advanced snack manufacturers in the country, and one of the most quietly influential. Inside the plant, stainless steel mixers turn grains into dough. Extruders fire out perfect shapes at high speed. Seasoning drums coat snacks in a cloud of flavor. Packaging lines sell thousands of bags per hour. This is food manufacturing at industrial scale. Clean, fast, and incredibly precise. But Wyandotte didn't just keep up with the industry, they led it. They became pioneers in plant-based snacks. Ancient grains like sorghum and quinoa, organic and non-GMO production, private label innovation, zero waste, and sustainable manufacturing. Wyandotte earned a B Corp certification, joining the global group of companies committed to environmental and social responsibility. In a world where consumers demand healthier options, Wyandotte became the partner brand's call when they need something new. Wyandotte isn't just part of the American pantry, it helps shape it. But behind every bag is a workforce that treats snack making like a craft. Generations of Marion families have worked here, mixing, seasoning, packaging, and shipping snacks across the country. The plant became a steady employer through recessions, industrial shifts, and changing food trends. And then came 1996. A devastating fire leveled the production facility. For most companies, that would have been the end. Wyandotte chose a different path. They spent over $1 million to keep all 300 employees on the payroll during the 8 months of rebuild. That decision bought them something money can't buy, loyalty that spans generations. Today, Wyandotte continues to invest in automation, plant-based innovation, sustainable production, ensuring the legacy that began in the 1930s farm continues well into the next century. Wyandotte is proof that not all industry is still machinery. Sometimes it's corn, creativity, and a little bit of crunch. This is the quiet giant of Marion, the snack factory you've probably never heard of, but definitely tasted. Every factory has a front door, but the supply chain has an emergency room. And it's here, tucked into Marion's industrial corridor, where the wounded arrive. Chemical tank cars, food-grade rail vessels, pressurized tankers that have taken a beating from thousands of miles of freight rail. This isn't manufacturing, this is triage. High stakes, high pressure industrial surgery, where welders, inspectors, and technicians decide whether a rail tanker lives to run another load. This is DGIX Tanker Repair, the place the rail supply chain comes to survive. Every day, rail tankers move chemicals, food-grade liquids, fuels, industrial materials across the Midwest. But before they return to the rails, they come here, to DGIX. This yard is where tank cars are cleaned, repaired, inspected, and certified. It's the kind of work most people never think about, but without it, the rail supply chain stops. DJIX is part machine shop, part welding bay, part compliance center. When a rail tanker arrives, dented, worn, or out of spec, it doesn't get a quick patch. It undergoes industrial surgery. Welders rebuild domes, manways and valves. Technicians certify pressure vessels to rigorous DOT and FRA standards. Every weld is scrutinized, every valve is tested, every repair must survive the extreme forces of freight rail. This is forensic work, a master technician's world of material stress, structural integrity, and regulatory precision. Factories like Whirlpool, Nucor, Piston, and Motherson rely on these rail tankers to bring in materials and ship out their products. DGIX keeps these tankers safe, legal, and on the rails. It's not glamorous, but it's the backbone of movement, the quiet work that keeps the visible work possible. In the story of an industrial town, this is the part that keeps the heart beating. Before we head into downtown, I want to hear from the people who live this story. If you worked in one of these factories, or if someone in your family did, share your memories in the comments. Your stories help document the history of Marion, and I read and respond to every single one of them. And if there's a town you think I should explore next, let me know. I keep a running spreadsheet of every suggestion, and your idea might shape the next video. This entire project is just me, one person, self-funded, traveling from town to town to preserve these stories before they disappear. If you want to help me keep doing this, the super thanks button below goes a long way. And stay with me to the end. I've added a new community spotlight where I read your comments from the last video. Now let's head downtown. Every industrial town has two identities: the places where people work and the places where people live. And if the factories built Marion's backbone, downtown is where you find its heartbeat. This is where the stories converge: the storefronts, the sidewalks, the diners, the courthouse square. A place shaped by a century of boom, bust, and reinvention. This is downtown Marion, the living room of the city. Long before the factories defined Marion, the city grew outward from this very spot. The courthouse square was the original anchor, a place where farmers, merchants, and travelers met at the crossroads of commerce. The Marion County Courthouse, built between 1884 and 1886 for $150,000, nearly $5 million today, rose as a symbol of permanence. Its Richardsonian, Romanesque stonework told the world that Marion expected to matter. Streetcars rattled down Center Street, and urban lines connected Marion to Columbus and the region. Hotels, banks, and department stores rose as industrial wealth poured into the city. In 1928, the Palace Theater opened, a $500,000 project, about $9 million today's money, and one of the last atmospheric theaters, complete with a star-studded ceiling and Mediterranean courtyard interior. Downtown was the showcase, the place you brought visitors to prove Marion was going someplace. As the factories grew, so did the businesses that served them. Tailors and shoe shops, hardware stores, cafe and lunch counters, movie palaces, union halls. For decades, downtown was the social engine of the city, the place where paychecks were spent, where families gathered, and where the community lived its public life. But like so many Midwestern towns, Marion felt the shockwaves when industry shifted. At its peak, Marion supported over 12,000 industrial jobs, and the city operated on the equivalent of $100 million a year in today's dollars. When the Scioto Ordnance Plant went silent, when Marion Power Shovel declined, and when factories automated, that economic engine sputtered. Today, the city operates on roughly half of that, a reflection of a smaller industrial base and a changing economy. The rise of malls and big box retail pulled shoppers away. Storefronts emptied, buildings aged, the heartbeat slowed, and for a while, downtown became a memory. A place people drove through, not to. Yet the bones of the city remain. The courthouse still stood guard. The Palace Theater, one of Ohio's last atmospheric theaters, survived decades of decline. Early 1900s commercial blocks, built for tens of thousands of dollars, millions today, still line the square. Look at these facades. You can still see where the original brickwork was covered with metal siding in the 70s. The physical scar of a city trying to hide its age. The walkable grid remained, the architectural ambition remained, and the sense of something worth saving is still here, remained. Downtown never died, it just waited. And now you can feel it, the pulse coming back. New restaurants and cafes, boutiques and small businesses, murals and public art, events at the square, a slow but steady return to life. This isn't a sudden revival, it's a grassroots one block at a time, one building at a time. The Palace Theater lights still glow, restored through community effort. The courthouse still anchors the skyline just as it did in 1886. And the people, the same families who built Marion's industrial legacy, are breathing new life into the streets. In a city shaped by machines, downtown is a reminder that industry is only half the story. The other half is here in the places where people gather, celebrate, rebuild, and imagine what comes next. Downtown Marion isn't a relic, it's a reminder that a city's heart doesn't stop beating just because the machines slowed down. Factories tell you what a city built, but neighborhoods tell you who built it. And this is where shifts end, where the boots came off, where families grew, and where generations of Marion workers carved out their lives. These streets raised welders, machinists, teachers, soldiers, and even a president of the United States. If factories were Marion's backbone, these neighborhoods are its soul. Walk through Marion's residential grid and you're looking at a physical timeline of a city's industrial climb. These homes, modest, practical, and built to last, were designed for men and women who powered the steam shovels, the foundries, the rail yards, the whirlpool lines, and built in the shadows of the factories. They were designed for walking commutes, not long drives. You can read the decades in architecture, early 1900s worker cottages, post-war GI homes, and 1960s ranch homes built during Marion's last big industrial surge. At its peak in the early 1970s, Marion's population climbed to nearly 46,000 people, fueled by more than 12,000 industrial jobs. These neighborhoods were full, every driveway, every porch, and every yard alive with the routines of the working class city. And from these neighborhoods came people who shaped far more than Marion. From a quiet home on Mount Vernon Avenue, Warren G. Harding, the 29th President of the United States, a man who rose from a small-town newspaper editor to the White House. Marion also raised Norman Thomas, the six-time presidential candidate and one of America's most influential social activists. And from just outside the city came Mary Ellen Withrow, the 40th Treasurer of the United States, another reminder that Marion has always produced people who shaped the nation. From these streets came inventors, athletes, artists, and generations of workers whose names never made the papers, but whose labor built the machines that built America. These neighborhoods didn't just raise families, they raised legacies. As industry changed, so did the neighborhoods. Marion's population sits at around 35,000, a reflection of a long, slow transition from heavy manufacturing to healthcare, logistics, and service sector jobs. Some homes aged, some were lost, some were restored. But the character of these streets, the pride, the resilience, the sense of community never disappeared. You can still see it today, kids riding bikes on the same sidewalks their grandparents used. Neighbors talking across fences, flags on porches, gardens in front yards. The quiet dignity of working class town that refuses to fade. In the story of Marion, the factories built the backbone, but the neighborhoods built the people, and the people are what kept this city alive, long after the machines go quiet. Every town has numbers, population, income, cost of living, but numbers don't tell you what it feels like to live somewhere. That's why I built the Quality of Life Index, a diagnostic tool that looks beyond headlines and stereotypes to measure the lived reality of a community. It's not just about crime rates or home prices. It's about the schools, the parks, the commutes, the health care, and the small comforts that shape daily life. This isn't a ranking, it's an x-ray, a way to understand the strengths, the struggles, and the everyday rhythms of a city like Marion. The Quality of Life Index answers one simple question: what is life like here today? Using 10 diagnostic categories, each scored from 0 to 10 and weighted by real-world impact. The index creates a 0 to 100 snapshot of a city's overall livability. It's not about judging a town, it's about understanding it. Marion earns a 6 out of 10 for safety. Overall crime is lower than the national average, but violent crime sits above the state's baseline. It's a mixed profile, safer than most Rust Belt cities, but still carrying the weight of economic transition. Affordability is Marion's strongest asset. With home prices and rents far below state and national averages, the city scores a 9 out of 10. For families, retirees, and anyone looking to stretch a paycheck, Marion offers something rare in 2026: room to breathe. Education comes in at 4 out of 10. High school completion is steady, but college attainment is low, and districts face same challenges seen across many post-industrial communities. Vocational programs remain a bright spot, reflecting Marion's working-class roots. The local economy scores a 3. Unemployment sits above the national average, and poverty rate remains high. Marion is transitioning from heavy industry to healthcare, logistics, and service sector jobs, a slow but outgoing shift. Healthcare earns a 6. Marion's General Hospital anchors the region, and access to basic care is solid. Costs remain below the national average, giving residents reliable coverage without the financial strain seen in larger cities. Cleanliness lands at 5 out of 10. Like many older industrial towns, Marion carries visible signs of its past: aging structures, pockets of blight, and neighborhoods in transition. But community pride keeps many areas well maintained. Amenities scores a 7. The Palace Theater, the Harding Home, local dining, parks, and community gathering spots give Marion more cultural weight than a city its size usually carries. Housing quality comes in at a 5. The stock is older, with a mix of well-kept homes and properties showing their age. It's a portrait of a city shaped by multiple eras of growth and decline. Infrastructure earns a 6. Roads, utilities, and broadband are reliable, and commutes are short, often under 15 minutes. For many residents, that alone is a quality of life upgrade you can't put a price on. Recreation scores a 6. Parks, trails, museums, and the Palace Theater give residents a solid mix of outdoor and cultural options. It's not a tourist city, but it doesn't try to be. Put it all together, and Marion earns a 62 out of 100 on the Quality of Life Index. Not perfect, not broken. A city with real strengths, affordability, amenities, and community, and real challenges in education, the economy, and long-term stability. Using the town rating scale, that score of 62 places Marion in the category of struggling, not collapsing, not in free fall, but showing visible signs of decay and the pressure placed on its core industries. It's the stage where the city isn't failing, but it is fighting. Struggling doesn't mean hopeless. It means the patient is still responsive. It means the systems are stressed, but not beyond repair. It means the city is at the point where the decisions made today by leaders, by businesses, and by the people who call this place home will determine whether Marion stabilizes or slides farther down the scale. And in Marion, these decisions are already being made by the people who stay, who rebuild, and who believe that the good life isn't measured by the size of a skyline, but by the strengths of a community. Before we close, I want to highlight the people who keep this project alive. All of you who show up in the comments with memories, corrections, and stories that fill in the gaps that history books leave behind. This week, Baja 915 shared the hard truth about private equity, how it can gut a company from the inside out, and that's not theory, that's lived experience. Channel 53X and Michael Lamb, 1342, brought Seagram's back to life, from the iconic naughty bottle to the sheer scale of distillery, best understood from a boat on the Ohio River. That's the kind of detail only locals know. Anthony Young, SS7 NV, told us what it was like living across from the old Aurora Casket Company and how the real activity moved to the newer plant. The perfect example of how industry shifts long before it disappears. Wrath of Bath 1920 filled in a missing chapter. The I&M coal plant in downtown Lawrenceburg shut down in 2015 under new EPA regulations. These riverfront plants powered entire regions until the world changed around them. Joseph Morling, 4196, asked us to look into Vevey, Indiana. E-stop 4804 pointed us towards Noblesville and his Firestone plant. These aren't just comments, they're leads. They're the next towns on the map. And Jeffrey Hausman, 7061, reminded us we missed Anchor Glass in Greendale, still producing glassware for the whiskey industry. That's why this community matters. You don't just watch the videos, you help complete them. And if I mispronounce anybody's name, I sincerely apologize. If you've got a story about Marion or any town shaped by industry, share it in the comments. Tell me where you worked, what factory your family depended on, or what plant defined your hometown. I read every single one. And if there's a place you think deserves an episode, drop it below. I keep a running list of every suggestion, and your town might be the next one I visit. And if you want to support the channel, consider subscribing, share this video, and using the super thanks button. Every bit of support helps me travel, film, and keep documenting the places that build America. Stick around to the end of each episode, and your comment might be featured in the next Community Spotlight. Marion, Ohio is one chapter in a much bigger story. A story of towns built on industry, tested by change, and held together by the people who refuse to let them fade quietly. On paper, Marion scores a 62 out of 100 on the Quality of Life Index, placing it in the struggling tier on the town rating scale. But numbers only tell part of the story. In your memories, in the plants you worked, the neighborhoods you grew up in, and the factories that shaped your families, that struggle looks a lot like resilience. Thanks for watching, and thanks for being part of this community. I'll see you in the next town.